never forget. Like one was when Alfred Hitchcock came in and talked about his pseudomembranous colitis that antibiotics gave him in the hospital, and gave a description of that. But when David Sackett came and introduced us to clinical epidemiology, as it was called at the time, and evidence-based medicine, I'll never forget. And Sackett, his definition of using the best available evidence to guide clinical decisions. About 6-7 years ago, I completely redirected my career toward primary prevention using lifestyle, and I've appreciated its power to heal patients. And I want to share some of that with you. You all, just imagine for a moment, back in your shop, your hospital health system where you work, that you could be running as part of your program a disease reversal clinic, where patients would come with, whether it be type 2 diabetes or cognitive decline or common GI problems, autoimmune disease, and you actually offered the best available current treatments for returning them to health. The whole osteopathic concept I've learned, that the body actually wants to heal if we can create the environment for healing. And we in America don't have an environment for healing. There's a common expression now that the standard American diet and lifestyle has resulted in the standard American diseases. And if you can make an impact on that, you can actually begin to reverse the disease. I mean, every time I see a new type 2 diabetic, I ask them, how would you like to not be a diabetic? And they go, what are you talking about? And I go, well, you don't have to be a diabetic. And they go, you're kidding. And I go, yeah, there's a pathway out of type 2 diabetes that you could follow and return to being a normal person. Well, they go, what the hell is that, and why hasn't any doctor ever mentioned it? Just as an example. One of the most profound medical education experiences I've had during this last decade is to take the 1-week course applying functional medicine to clinical practice. It's the introductory part of the Institute for Functional Medicine. And what was amazing to me is the pathophysiology and the human biology that was there. It was the biggest deep dive into that I had had since medical school. And it was fun because it was so clinically relevant and clinically applicable. I mean, I actually learned to really understand the Krebs cycle for the first time, because what it is in part of human biology and human nutrition, and that was really quite exciting. This work is all empiric evidence. It's not funded by major funders. NIH is not funding this except for occasional reductionistic kind of stuff. And there's no big pharma funding it, and big food isn't funding it. So it ends up being, you know, if you look at the history of medicine's advances, it's been based by and large on a better understanding of our biology and the environment and empiric evidence. And then, you know, I call the RCTs and the others, as I was alluded to, sort of the mop-up operation to say what's really true about what's new and what isn't. And that stuff is, of course, vitally important as we sort things out. So I like to start my work with who are we? Daniel Lieberman is one of the most popular professors at Harvard. He's an evolutionary biologist, and he studied various human species. He did pioneering work on showing that we're natural runners. As a matter of fact, he would argue that one of the main factors that Homo sapiens survived over the other hominids is our ability to run down our food. And but Homo erectus, for example, an early hominid, was a good runner. But he went public with his book, The Story of the Human Body. The subtitle is the most important: Evolution, Health, and Disease. And the guy knows an incredible amount of medicine, which is in the book. And just by brief review, human species have been around, as far as we know, for about 2.5 million years. We separated from the bonobos and the chimpanzees about 5 million years ago, and we went through some pre-human species like the Australopiths. But we've been around 2.5 million years. Homo sapiens, actually, at the time this book came out, we only had 240,000 years. We now have evidence that Homo sapiens has been around 300,000 years. That might change. But that's our species. We shared the planet with other hominids until 30,000 years ago, which is quite interesting, and there was some cross-fertilization. But things changed 10,000 years ago when we became farmers. So we were no longer nomadic, we were no longer living in small tribes, and we were able to settle down, form towns, form communities, stay in one place, and agriculture developed over the earth simultaneously in different locations. Now 10,000 years ago is 3% of 300,000 years. And then things really changed a couple of hundred years ago with the industrial age and the industrialization of our nutrition supply and farming and other things. And but the point is Lieberman argues that we have a hunter-gatherer body, evolution-wise, that is living in an industrial age culture. And that has resulted in progress, lots of progress, but also mismatches between our evolutionary body and our modern culture. And that most of our chronic diseases that we have are mismatched diseases. And he argues, as do others, that we are in a state of disevolution. That is, biologically, we're becoming less healthy as a species. Now, we can argue longevity has gone up, but even that is now leveled off and has had some small declines. You're blaming the opioid epidemic or others, but the truth of the matter is our health span, our numbers of years of being healthy are in decline, and there's a lot of things that are mismatched diseases. I'll go into more of them. Now, another one of my mentors is I got lucky because Jared Diamond was actually a physiology teacher at UCLA in the early 70s, and so he was one of my lecturers in physiology, but we mostly know him as an anthropologist. He's one of those super geniuses who is a full professor in 4 separate colleges at UCLA. They did an article once on him, and they called him the man who knows too much. When he was at Harvard as a science major, he won the classics contest at Harvard several years in a row. But he went public in 1987 saying the biggest mistake the human race ever made was to start to eat grasses. That our GI tract is not designed for grasses. But one of the things we did with the birth of the agrarian age is we figured out how to take the seeds of grasses and turn it into flour. And so we created wheat, oats, barley, rice, corn, all as grasses that we were able to eat. Now they are enormously powerful in terms of energy. They've prevented a lot of starvation during famines, but they have not been ultimately healthy, at least by his argument. And this cartoon, one of the cartoons on the disevolution of man, I don't even hear laughter among this group. When I give this talk to lay audiences, they all start chuckling. But unfortunately, we have a bit of evidence that this is true. This is a partial list right out of Lieberman's book about our mismatched diseases. And it's kind of interesting. But he argues that these are not diseases that need to exist. And as a matter of fact, if you go visit Longevity Village in China, where more people live over the age of 100 than anywhere else on Earth, these diseases are very unusual. Some of them, like things like lupus and others, were pretty unusual 50, 60 years ago compared to now. Sometimes when I get this slide, people say, oh, come on, impacted wisdom teeth. What the hell is that? If we chewed as young babies and children, eating the food of nature like root vegetables and stuff that we chewed, your jaw develops differently. And you have plenty of room for your wisdom teeth. One of the things we don't do as a young child is chew in a way that is good for the development of our jaw. If we were raised more outdoors and had different vision exposure, we would have far less myopia, for example. And Lieberman goes into lots of those examples in his book. But he argues pretty impressively that our chronic diseases are mismatched diseases, which means that potentially our chronic diseases are reversible. And that's what I'm here to talk about. I now practice disease reversal. I consider hypertension a symptom or sign of a dysfunctional lifestyle, not a chronic disease that someone has to have. And same with hyperlipidemia, same with type 2 diabetes, same with all the common GI problems like GERD and irritable bowel. I don't manage those diseases, as you mentioned, and we've mentioned here a lot. I offer reversal. And obviously not everybody's willing to make the lifestyle changes, but what's gratifying now, and I'm going to be going through some academically based programs that now have a very long track record of disease reversal. But unfortunately, this is who we are. 40% of us are frankly obese. 70% of us are overweight. 70% of us have prediabetes. And if you have the blood sugar of prediabetes, that is your blood sugars between 100 and 126, you have double the rate of brain atrophy at any age as a senior. And in 2010, 1 out of 3 Americans had Alzheimer's disease by 85. And it's estimated that given the rate of overweight, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, that it's going to be 50% among the cohort moving into their senior years. Determinants of health, food ranks 4th, medical care ranks 7th. We looked at that in another way with Alan's slides. I like to borrow from Tolstoy talking about families to talk about, healthy bodies tend to be alike. They live a very healthy lifestyle and have healthy nutrition. Unhealthy body is unhealthy in its own way, which makes lifestyle medicine very interesting and individualized. So let me talk about some university-based programs. This is Sarah Hallberg. Sarah is a young internist at Indiana University. She runs the intensive dietary management program at IU in Indianapolis, and where she routinely reverses diabetes, overweight, and obesity. She has young children at home. I know, thanks to Larry Bauer, I know Sarah Hallberg because we talked together at FMEC. She says, I don't have any books because I got young kids at home. I don't have time to write books, but she's an excellent speaker. And I would urge all of you to listen to her 18-minute TEDx talk that she gave. But one of the things I love about the way Sarah talks, she says, you give me any type 2 diabetic, and I will make them a non-diabetic on no drugs within 2 weeks to 3 months. And the way I do that is to simply ask them to stop eating foods we don't need, which is a little bit of a profound statement. There are 3 macronutrients: fat, protein, carbohydrates. We then have micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals, etc. One of the 3 macronutrients are optional. We have essential fatty acids that we have to consume to be healthy. We have essential amino acids that we have to consume to be healthy. But there are no essential carbohydrates. As a matter of fact, the Inuit in the far north who live off caribou have a 0 carbohydrate diet. The Maasai and the Samburu tribes in Africa have a 0 carbohydrate diet. Now, I'm not here to recommend a 0 carbohydrate diet, but I think you can get an idea about what we're talking about, because we have a 65 to 70% carbohydrate diet. The American Diabetes Association recommends a 65% carbohydrate diet, as does the American Heart Association. Now, why would they do that? Well, just look at their Nutrition Advisory Board and who's there, and the involvement. The reason she titles her talk "Reverse Diabetes by Ignoring the Guidelines" is that the guidelines are kind of based on what I call the American Perpetuating Diabetes Association, which is high carbohydrate nutrition. Now, Eric Westman at Duke does the same thing. He has clinics for curing diabetes and obesity at Duke. He was recently president of the American Bariatric Society. He gives, again, videos. Westman's been involved with a number of books on intermittent fasting and low carbohydrate nutrition, but he also has videos online of how to do the low carbohydrate healthy fat diet, again, for curing diabetes and obesity. Now, Jason Fung, who is a young nephrologist, I regret that a lot of these pioneers are not family docs. The most common medical specialty getting training right now in functional medicine are family physicians. But some of these pioneer clinics that are going on at university centers, Westman and Hallberg are primary care docs. Fung trained in nephrology at University of Toronto, and he realized that he was going to be doing dialysis on diabetics who had lost their kidneys, and he said, the heck with this. I'm going to start a clinic for dealing with these problems in an aggressive way. And the beauty of his two books, which are really highly scientific, one 2016, the other 2018, is that he takes what he calls Occam's razor to the problem and basically simplifies it to a dynamic between insulin and glucose. And every time we consume carbohydrates, especially ones that are processed or in juices and things with a rapid rise in blood sugar, we get the rise in insulin and the role of insulin. And he talks about that basically insulin is the hormone that drives the diseases. Now in medical school we're taught that insulin is required to put sugar into cells. And as far as I'm concerned, my education kind of stopped there. And we know that type 1 diabetics die because they don't have any insulin, and they need it. But he points out, putting together the clear biochemistry that I don't remember ever being taught, is that insulin not only drives sugar into cells, but it stimulates lipogenesis. It is the fundamental hormone for laying down fat. And it's why most body fat comes from excess carbohydrates. It can come from excess fat also, but only in an environment, typically with excess carbohydrates. And so it stimulates lipogenesis. It also blocks lipolysis. So in a simplistic way, the biochemistry is more complicated and nuances are more complicated, but in a simplistic way, we preferentially have to burn off our carbohydrate energy, and we can store about 2,000 calories of carbohydrate energy. But we have to burn that off, and all the carbs that we don't burn get turned into fat. But while that's happening, we basically lock the door on burning fat. So you'll see the studies where exercise isn't very good for weight loss, and that's because people drink Gatorade, or they take their energy bars into the gym, and they're working out, getting more fit, but they're not losing weight, and it's because of their consuming carbs. And I tell people that I talk to in the evening, we'll have that cocktail before dinner, we'll have our bread with dinner, we'll have our potatoes or rice with dinner, and then we'll have share a tiramisu or have some ice cream, a couple glasses of wine, and all night lipogenesis is going to be happening. David S. Ludwig at Harvard is a highly scientific pediatric endocrinologist at Children's Hospital. He has done most of the research on the insulin carbohydrate axis for obesity. His book is called Always Hungry, about how carbohydrates drive hunger, but has laid out is that, the others that I talked about are clinicians. Ludwig is a deep scientist and is loaded with the articles about why carbohydrates and insulin are fundamentally at the basis of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Not the data that the food industry wants us to hear, because carbs are the most profitable food commodities. Robert Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist at UC San Francisco, and his books are loaded with anger. He also writes very, very angry articles. And the reason he's so angry is that he takes care of children at San Francisco General Hospital who have type 2 diabetes. But his greatest anger is now being addressed to the American food industry, because we actually don't make sugar in America anymore. our sugar, the labor costs from sugar beets or sugar cane is now such that it's all outside the United States. But the American farmer has a nice, inexpensive workaround from our corn. And high fructose corn syrup is now the sugar that's in almost all sodas, salad dressings, and anything that you taste is sweet. The problem is that the ratio of glucose to fructose in high fructose corn syrup is not recognized by the body in the same way sucrose is. Sucrose can be digested in our blood. That's one reason it gets in fairly quickly. But high fructose corn syrup, which tastes to us the same, has to be processed by the liver. And in the act of being processed in the liver, it causes an inflammatory reaction in the liver that results in early fatty liver. So Lustig is now seeing children with fatty liver, which is emerging as the most common cause of liver failure, more common than hepatitis or alcohol. So he foresees soon an epidemic of liver failure in relatively young adults in America on high fructose corn syrup. Now, so overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, I routinely now offer reversal of these problems. Very successful. I saw a patient this week who heads payroll for Eisenhower's, lost 70 pounds in 4 to 6 months, thanking me that he didn't go get bariatric surgery. All he had to do was something that was so easy. Stop eating carbs. Stop eating carbs, your hunger goes down, you can eat 1 or 2 meals a day. And by the way, Jason Fung, his other major contribution is the intermittent fasting. As hunter-gatherers, we ate 1 meal a day as far as we know. We got up in the morning, we hunted, we gathered. If it was a good day, we could play for a while. We feasted, we went to bed, repeated the next day. Simplistic, but in general, biologically, we ate 1 meal a day. As we heard earlier, breakfast isn't healthy. We don't have to eat breakfast. One of his secrets is to get people to fast. Now, how long can we go without eating? We can only go 3 to 5 days without water or we die of thirst. When do we die of starvation? Well, in the medical literature, and I went to it, a 27-year-old gentleman who weighed 452 pounds did not consume macronutrients for 382 days. Medically monitored fast, over a year. Didn't lose a pound of muscle. You don't lose muscle until you've burned off all your fat. He worked out every day to preserve his muscle. He was given his micronutrients, but he fasted for 382 days. Jason Fung, and I'm now doing this with patients, if you want to reverse type 2 diabetes in 2 weeks, you do it by not eating. You fast. He will use minimum 3-day, often 7, 14, and 21-day fast with patients. I had a 30-year type 2 diabetic, 265-pound guy come into me saying, I heard that you can reverse diabetes, and I go, well, I work at it. And he said, I'm really interested. You've been on drugs for 30 years. And I said, well, if you're in Jason Fung's clinic, he'd put you on a fast. How would you like to not eat for the next 3 days, just stay hydrated? He says, well, I've never done that. I'd like to give it a try. So I said, well, and I'm on email with all my patients. He went home. Well, 3 days later, he wrote me back and he said, I feel terrific. I haven't felt this good in a long time. Can I keep fasting? And I said, of course you can. Let's keep fasting as long as you can. And so he fasted for 9 days before he didn't. And of course his blood sugars came down, took him off all his drugs during the fast. And he's now a few months into it, has lost about 50 pounds. He has found what works for him is he does not eat 3 days a week. So he does a 24-hour fast on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and enjoys that. You know, fasting has been around for thousands of years. It's in the Bible. It's in the Jewish tradition. It's in the Quran. It's great for the brain to have mental clarity and insight and inspiration. Of course, we think we need to eat, but fasting is really what he put into it to being critical to reversing the diabetes. Now for a routine, I take care of a lot of seniors, I get them on 2 meals a day in an 8-hour period. So they don't eat breakfast, they may eat at 11 in the morning, they'll finish dinner at 7 in the evening, or you can adjust it to noon to 8 o'clock. It gives them a 16-hour fast every day. They're burning fat every day and achieving the benefits of ketosis for part of the day. Let me switch to GI problems. Robin Chutkin is a gastroenterologist in Washington, D.C., trained at Georgetown, was on the faculty at Georgetown for a number of years. She runs a women's health clinic for reversing common GI problems. She's actually written 3 books. This is the most medically oriented book about why what you eat determines your microbiome and why healing the microbiome is critical to getting over GI problems. And basically it means getting over the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, that results in leaky gut. H. pylori causing peptic ulcers doesn't come from catching it somewhere or eating the wrong food. H. pylori is a good guy in our colon microbiome, but it does it by migrating north based on eating the wrong foods. And she puts people on a GI anti-inflammatory diet, off of grains, off of cow's milk, off of processed oils, and eating fermented foods and rebuilding your microbiome. Women love her original book called The Bloat Cure. I never realized that women were bloated a lot, but they are apparently. It's a symptom more than guys who would complain of others. And then she, actually her first book was Gut Bliss, but you know, for women with GI problems, I basically have them read Robin Chutkin. Now men, Gerard Mullen, who is a pre-med, weighed over 400 pounds and was told he'd never get into medical school looking like that, got a degree in nutrition, got healthy, and now at Johns Hopkins he runs a GI clinic using nutrition to heal GI diseases at Hopkins. And he describes his work in this book, The Gut Balance Revolution. So you got 2 gastroenterologists who have developed the protocols for reversing, whether it be GERD. We know that the PPI drugs, which become really necessary to control GERD symptoms on people on a typical American diet, are bad for you. They cause nutrient deficiencies, abnormal fractures, more likelihood to get pneumonia, and even dementia. But people can't get off their Prilosec or their Nexium, and the GI doctors, all they care about is controlling GI symptoms. But you can get off all those drugs. I routinely get people off their PPI drugs for good, get them over their irritable bowel problems, but they also have evidence of both preventing and reversing Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, which they feel are nutritional problems. So that's the GI area. Terry Walls, professor of medicine at University of Iowa, became disabled in her 40s from multiple sclerosis. Did not respond to the drugs, even some of the new biologics, so she took it upon herself to do her own protocols that she developed by trial and error of natural healing, and completely reversed her disease. She now works, and she has a clinic at Iowa and then works online to reverse MS and other autoimmune diseases by an absolutely rigorous anti-inflammatory diet. You have the glycemic problems at one end with overweight, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. You've got the inflammatory, usually inflammatory proteins or inflammatory oils that people take. She offers 3 diets, which is kind of interesting because her own work has shown that there's 3 approaches. The one approach is 9 cups of vegetables a day, very heavy plant-based diet, and both leafy and cruciferous, and goes into detail with those. And then her other diets give other options with healthy oils, and actually one of her diets is focused a lot on organ meats, again from very healthy sources. But very interesting work that she now speaks and provides, but it's really laid out very well. So I consider this my go-to source for anti-inflammatory diets. Other sources are similar, but I think hers is the most scientific. She's well referenced. If you do a PubMed search for Terry Walls, you get about 25 different articles that she's contributed to the literature. Cancer is a new area in terms of nutrition and cancer. There are now at least 12 cancers that are directly related to our American diet. And there's evidence that by fixing our diet, you can show some improvement in 6 of them. It's a very, very early area. Clearly, people who follow a whole food, plant-based diet have the lowest cancer rates, and suggestive evidence say they may have greater evidence for spontaneous remission in cancer. You know, why whole food, plant-based diets are not promoted by every cancer center. We do know that sugar feeds cancer, fasting starves cancer, and that biology is getting worked out. Why cancer cells demand more energy than our normal cells. So fasting starves cancers. Being in a ketogenic state seems to starve cancer. Clearly sugar feeds cancer. The big thing that happened just a year and a half ago is Dale Bredesen going public. Now, Bredesen is a UCLA professor of neurology who has not been a clinician during his career. He spent more than 20 years looking for the magic of reversing Alzheimer's disease. Funded by the pharmaceutical industry, funded by NIH, and he did that work, all of which has not produced results. As a matter of fact, the work that he and his colleagues have done, it shows that if you actually dissolve the amylin plaques, which are outside the neuron, and the tau protein bundles inside the neuron, we can now dissolve those and the patients get worse. Because it looks like those are scar tissue to the inflammation of Alzheimer's disease, not core to the pathology. Fortuitously, Bredesen's wife is a family physician trained in functional medicine and told her husband, if you're going to fix Alzheimer's disease, you got to fix the lifestyle. And so he said, listen, I'm going to put it to the test. So patient 0, which he described in an article in the journal Aging in 2014, Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a Novel Therapeutic Approach. Couldn't get any funding for his work because there were no single variables. He describes Alzheimer's as a leaking roof with 36 different holes, and if you want to stop the roof from leaking, you better try to plug all of them. And so he's done it on his own, and he reversed his original patient. That didn't get a lot of attention, but in 2016, when he published in Aging, Reversal of Cognitive Decline in 11 patients, it actually got a lot of press. Now, it was dismissed pretty much by the scientific community. It was not a controlled trial, very small study, but you know, there were a lot of question marks. Could lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, reverse cognitive decline? He's now done it to more than 200 patients. And on. He even reverses cognitive decline, regrowing the hippocampus by volumetric MRI studies, even in people with ApoE4 positive, homozygous positive. He has a whole group of ApoE4 positive people who reverse their cognitive decline on the Bredesen protocol. And he now teaches the Bredesen protocol all over the world. Kind of reminds me of when William Banting, the group at Toronto, isolated insulin and treated one child first, got better, then 6 children, they got better, and really made insulin available to the world for type 1 diabetes. We can now reverse cognitive decline. There's 2 neurologists at Loma Linda, Dean and Aisha Scherzai. They're a married couple, run the cognitive health clinic at Loma Linda. They've got a book also on reversing cognitive decline using a whole food plant-based diet. I give a whole talk on this area. Bredesen uses intermittent fasting and a healthy Mediterranean diet. healthy Mediterranean diet also includes seafood, very little red meat, mostly nuts, olive oil, avocados, that tend to be fatty foods. In order to reverse it on the Bredesen protocol, his own work says that neurogenesis doesn't happen until you can get your fasting blood sugar below 90, your fasting insulin below 5, which are not levels that very many people have. My fasting sugar is 85 and my fasting insulin is now about 2.7. It requires intermittent fasting along with a very healthy anti-inflammatory diet. He talks about Alzheimer's or other dementias coming from atrophy, inflammation, and toxins. So we've got this ability, what's interesting about disease reversal and the enormous opportunity for family medicine is that we are integrators. I've given you examples of university-based people that are picking their disease area, the GI tract, the autoimmune area, overweight, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, now cognitive decline. The healthy lifestyle all comes together. It's the same. And which gives an opportunity for us in family medicine to do this work. Now, the naturopaths and the others who are training in functional medicine are doing it in their practices. They're taking all comers. We all know Hippocrates. Dean Ornish,
Joe, you might want to open up for discussion pretty soon, so we don't.
Give me a minute.
Okay.
This has become my new favorite quote. It's an Ayurvedic medicine quote. I learned it from Dean Ornish. When the diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. When the diet is correct, medicine is of no need. Very profound. I think we heard some of it with evidence-based medicine. I just want to comment, Paul Farmer, we talk about poor communities and the pathologies of power and structural violence. I think we have structural violence in America from our food industry and putting profits over health. This is a village in Mexico where they don't have clean water. The kids are using Coca-Cola to stay hydrated. Indio High School in our East Valley, Jason Tate I work with, who's the Health Academy guy, are federally funded food programs for kids of service workers and farm workers. Get a breakfast, lunch, and after-school snack. 275 grams of carbs with 165 grams of sugar every day. We shouldn't be consuming more than about 50 grams of carbs. So we have the science, technology, and affluence for global health, as Paul Farmer says. I think we need the will to focus. Now, the other elements of lifestyle medicine are all very important, but the nutrition is vital, and it makes these other things easy. But I'm not going to go into the detail of our hour of exercise. All of those programs use the elements of this others. Lifestyle medicine, individuals, groups. I think we do palliative care for chronic diseases that we can actually cure. And I think we've become stooges for the food industry or the drug industry. And there's a way out of that. Thank you. Oh, Paracelsus. The dose makes the poison. So we're not talking about, you'll never have a bite of bread the rest of your life or a scoop of ice cream. But again, the dose makes the poison. I have a third edition of my book out, and there's my website with latest information. So let me throw it open.